For over half a century, Ozzy Osbourne has been rock's ultimate wild card. He's the man who shocked the world on stage, who turned chaos into an art form, and who earned the name the Prince of Darkness. Most fans think they know his story, the bats, the booze, the outrageous tours. But what if I told you that behind all the madness, Ozzy has always had a softer secret? He's not just a legend, he's also a fan, because before Ozzy was terrifying parents and leading Black Sabbath into the history books, he was just a kid from Birmingham with headphones on, worshiping the voices that came before him. And the bands he's kept close to his heart over the years tell us far more about him than you'd expect. Some are exactly what you'd guess, thunderous, heavy, and dark. Others are total curveballs. Bands that made metalheads furious when Ozzy admitted his love for them. But that's the beauty of it. Ozzy has never cared about fitting neatly into a box. His musical taste is as unpredictable as his career. These are not just names on a playlist. These are the artists that changed the way he sang, the way he wrote, and the way he saw himself. Without them, there may never have been a Black Sabbath, no solo Ozzy, and no Prince of Darkness. So today we're diving into 8 bands and musicians Ozzy Osbourne has called his favorites of all time. From childhood heroes to unexpected modern obsessions, these choices prove that even the godfather of heavy metal has his own idols. 1. The Beatles. Before Ozzy Osbourne became the Prince of Darkness, he was just John Michael Osbourne, a working-class kid in Aston, Birmingham. Life was tough. His family struggled to make ends meet, and the future looked bleak. Most boys his age ended up in the same cycle of factory jobs and dead-end work. But then, in 1963, something came over the radio that completely rewired his world. Ozzy heard the Beatles. He's described that moment like a thunderbolt. The harmonies, the energy, the swagger. It wasn't just music, it was hope. Suddenly, a poor kid from Birmingham saw that 4 lads from Liverpool, not so different from himself, could change the world with nothing more than guitars and attitude. Ozzy has even admitted, without the Beatles, I don't think there would be an Ozzy Osbourne. From that point on, the Beatles became his obsession. Every spare penny went into buying their records. He would sit in his room for hours, listening over and over until he knew every lyric, every note, every pause. His walls were covered in Beatles posters, and he often joked that he dreamed about Paul McCartney marrying his sister just so he could brag about having a Beatle in the family. And this wasn't just a teenage crush on pop stardom. Decades later, when asked to pick his top 10 favorite songs of all time, half of Ozzy's list was made up of Beatles tracks. Hey Jude was there, which he called the greatest song ever written. Yesterday made the cut, tied to memories of youth and wonder. And A Day in the Life still moved him to tears, even after years of performing his own classics. The Beatles weren't just a band to Ozzy. They were proof that music could save you. They gave him permission to dream bigger than Birmingham, to believe that life didn't have to be factory shifts and gray skies. They planted the seed of everything that would come next. And when that seed began to grow, it led Ozzy to discover bands that would challenge him, push him, and change the direction of heavy music forever. 2. Led Zeppelin. In the late 1960s, just as Black Sabbath were finding their footing, another band exploded onto the scene and completely redefined what rock could sound like. That band was Led Zeppelin. For Ozzy Osbourne, their arrival wasn't just impressive, it was intimidating. Ozzy has recalled a chance encounter in Birmingham when he and Geezer Butler ran into Robert Plant in a subway tunnel. Plant casually mentioned that he was joining a group called the New Yardbirds. Ozzy didn't think much of it at the time until that group changed their name to Led Zeppelin and released one of the most powerful debut albums in history. When Ozzy first heard Zeppelin's music, he said it hit him like a freight train. Robert Plant's soaring voice, Jimmy Page's guitar riffs, John Bonham's thunderous drumming. It was a sound that demanded attention. Sabbath may have been darker, but Zeppelin was monumental, and the bar had just been raised for every band trying to make their mark. What stood out most to Ozzy was Robert Plant's presence. On stage, Plant carried himself like a golden god, and that forced Ozzy to lean harder into his own darker, more theatrical style. Zeppelin weren't just competitors, they were a mirror, showing Sabbath that the only way to survive was to carve out their own unique path. Over time, the admiration grew. Ozzy praised Zeppelin's first two albums as works that fundamentally changed how he thought about music. He admitted their success pushed him and his bandmates to get heavier, scarier, and even more unapologetically different. And as Ozzy embraced that darker road, another friendship would soon shape his career in ways no one could have predicted. 3. Motörhead. When people talk about Ozzy Osbourne's closest friends in rock, one name always comes up: Lemmy Kilmister. Ozzy and Lemmy weren't just drinking buddies, they were partners, brothers, and collaborators whose friendship produced some of the most enduring music of the 1990s. Their bond started with respect. Lemmy had built Motörhead into one of the loudest, rawest, and most unapologetic bands in the world. Ozzy admired that toughness, the sense that Lemmy never compromised, never polished his edges to please anyone. He was, in Ozzy's words, the real deal. But their connection went far beyond admiration. When Ozzy was struggling with the early sessions of his No More Tears album, it was Lemmy who stepped in. Lemmy wrote lyrics for several tracks, including Mama, I'm Coming Home, which became one of Ozzy's biggest hits. The collaboration was so natural that Motörhead later recorded their own versions of some of those same songs, proof of how deeply their creative energies overlapped. Despite the chaos of their lives, their friendship never truly cracked. Even when industry politics tried to downplay Lemmy's contributions, Ozzy stood by him. He often said that Lemmy could write a brilliant song in the time it took most people to pour a drink. There was a mutual trust and honesty between them that was rare in the music business. For Ozzy, Motörhead represented more than just a favorite band. They were a reminder of what rock and metal were supposed to be: raw, fearless, and without pretense. And in Lemmy, Ozzy found a kindred spirit who lived and died by those same rules. But Ozzy's admiration didn't stop with close friends. Sometimes it extended to fellow frontmen who could have easily become rivals instead. 4. Judas Priest. If Black Sabbath put Birmingham on the map as the birthplace of heavy metal, Judas Priest cemented it as the capital. And for Ozzy Osbourne, no one embodied that legacy more than Rob Halford. There's a twist of fate here that still fascinates fans. More than once, during some of Sabbath's most turbulent years, Halford was rumored to be in line to replace Ozzy as the band's singer. It never happened, but the idea itself shows the level of respect Halford commanded. Even Ozzy admitted that if anyone could have stepped into his shoes, it would have been Rob. But instead of becoming bitter rivals, Ozzy and Halford developed a bond built on admiration. Ozzy has often spoken about Rob's voice with genuine awe, calling him one of the greatest singers he's ever heard. He's even joked that Halford can still hit notes that leave him shaking his head in disbelief. Coming from someone who stood alongside Ronnie James Dio, that praise carries serious weight. Their shared history as Birmingham kids also made the connection deeper. Both grew up in the same industrial wasteland, surrounded by factories and gray skies, yet both found a way to turn that bleakness into power. When Priest rose to fame in the late 1970s and early 80s, Sabbath and Priest were often competing for the crown of metal supremacy. Fans speculated about tensions, but behind the scenes, Ozzy admired how Halford carried the torch with such intensity. In later years, when Judas Priest were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Ozzy publicly congratulated Halford and the band, proving that respect had only grown stronger with time. For Ozzy, Judas Priest weren't just peers. They were proof that Birmingham had birthed more than one dynasty of metal. And while Ozzy looked up to Halford as a fellow frontman, another band would hit even closer to home, inspiring Sabbath to push their sound into new territory. 5 AC/DC. Few bands capture pure, unfiltered rock and roll energy quite like AC/DC, and Ozzy Osbourne has never hidden his admiration for them. To him, AC/DC represented the essence of what rock should be: simple, loud, and unstoppable. Ozzy has often praised the band's ability to take a straightforward formula, thundering riffs, pounding drums, and a chorus you can shout along to, and turn it into something unforgettable. He admired their discipline, the way they never drifted into overcomplication. As he once put it, they just go out there, plug in, and blow the roof off every single night. What really stuck with Ozzy was their consistency. While many bands from the 1970s struggled to reinvent themselves or collapsed under the weight of fame, AC/DC remained rock solid. From Bon Scott's raw, gritty vocals to Brian Johnson's explosive power, they delivered night after night, album after album. That kind of commitment resonated with Ozzy, who knew firsthand how hard it was to survive decade after decade in the music business. And like Sabbath, AC/DC built their empire on working-class grit. They weren't polished, they weren't pretentious, and they didn't care about trends. They just wrote songs that made people move, songs that filled arenas with electricity. Ozzy saw them as proof that you didn't need theatrics or gimmicks to be larger than life. You just had to mean every note. Beyond the music, Ozzy admired their endurance. Decade after decade, AC/DC weathered tragedy, lineup changes, and shifting musical landscapes. Yet they always came back swinging. That stubborn refusal to quit, that sheer survival instinct, was something Ozzy related to on the deepest level. But as the years went on, Ozzy's tastes didn't just stay rooted in classic rock. He found himself drawn to a new wave of music that carried the same rebellious fire he'd once sparked himself. 6. Nirvana. By the early 1990s, grunge had exploded out of Seattle and was threatening to wipe glam metal and traditional hard rock off the map. Many metal veterans dismissed the movement as a fad, but not Ozzy Osbourne. Instead, he found himself fascinated by one band in particular, Nirvana. Ozzy once recalled the surreal moment he crossed paths with Kurt Cobain and Dave Grohl in a Los Angeles studio. Grohl later admitted that he and Kurt were starstruck, whispering to each other in disbelief that the Prince of Darkness had just walked into the room. Ozzy, on the other hand, barely remembered the encounter, a reminder of just how chaotic his own life was at the time. But even without a deep personal connection, Ozzy felt a powerful pull toward Nirvana's music. What struck him most was the raw honesty in Cobain's voice. Nirvana stripped away all the glamour, all the theatrics, and left nothing but pain, frustration, and melody. For Ozzy, it was a mirror of what Black Sabbath had done 2 decades earlier, cutting through the noise of their era with something so blunt and real that it couldn't be ignored. Ozzy admired how Nirvana rejected the rock star image. There was no polish, no shiny veneer. It was messy, vulnerable, and completely unfiltered. He recognized the same spirit of rebellion that had fueled Sabbath in the early 70s. While critics argued about whether grunge was killing metal, Ozzy saw the bigger picture. This was simply the next generation carrying the torch. Fans often wondered what a collaboration between Ozzy and Kurt might have sounded like. Sadly, that dream never became reality. but the fact that Ozzy openly praised Nirvana at a time when many metal veterans dismissed them showed just how deeply he respected their impact. For him, they weren't a threat. They were proof that raw emotion and honesty in music never go out of style. And while Ozzy admired Nirvana's power, he also connected with their vulnerability. He understood the weight of fame, the struggles with inner demons, and the toll of carrying an entire generation's expectations on your shoulders. That sense of shared pain made his respect for the band more personal than many fans realized. And just as Nirvana proved that truth could be louder than polish, another band reminded Ozzy of the sheer power of friendship, brotherhood, and survival in rock and roll. 7. Green Day. Of all the bands Ozzy Osbourne has ever praised, none shocked the metal community more than Green Day. For decades, Ozzy was the voice of darkness, the man who practically invented heavy metal. So when fans learned he admired a California punk trio known for catchy hooks and radio hits, the backlash was immediate. Metal purists accused him of going soft, claiming that liking Green Day betrayed everything Sabbath had stood for. Forums and magazines lit up with debates as if Ozzy's approval of a punk band somehow rewrote his entire legacy. But as always, Ozzy didn't care what anyone thought. He liked what he liked, and he wasn't afraid to say it. For him, Green Day weren't just a pop-punk band. What he saw in them was the same rebellious energy that fueled Sabbath's early years. Their sharp attitude, their middle finger to authority, and their refusal to play by the rules reminded Ozzy of when he and his bandmates were just scrappy kids from Birmingham trying to make a noise loud enough to wake up the world. He was especially impressed by their ability to bridge underground rebellion with mainstream success. Albums like Dookie and American Idiot didn't just sell millions. They carried punk spirit to the top of the charts without losing their edge. That balance fascinated Ozzy, who knew how hard it was to stay authentic while becoming a global star. And while many mocked his love for Green Day, Ozzy's admiration was genuine. He respected Billy Joe Armstrong's sharp songwriting and the band's ability to turn teenage frustration into anthems that resonated across generations. In his mind, they proved that raw energy and truth didn't have to fade with time. You just had to keep playing like you meant it. And if Green Day proved that Ozzy's taste could still surprise fans decades into his career, the final choice on his list showed where it had all begun. The voice who guided him long before the world knew his name. 8. Johnny Cash. When you think of Ozzy Osbourne and Johnny Cash, the connection isn't obvious at first. One was the wild Prince of Darkness, famous for bats, booze, and outrageous tours. The other was the Man in Black, a country legend whose deep voice told stories of sin, faith, and redemption. But beneath the surface, the two had more in common than most people realized. Ozzy has often spoken about his admiration for Cash's authenticity. In a world full of artists chasing trends and fame, Cash never pretended to be anything but himself. He sang about prison, heartbreak, addiction, and salvation with the kind of honesty that couldn't be faked. Ozzy respected that. In fact, he once said that Cash could deliver more emotion in a single line than most singers could in an entire song. Their paths crossed in the late 1960s when Ozzy was facing backlash for taking Sabbath in an electric, heavier direction. Folk purists and critics accused him of betraying his roots. At that same moment, Johnny Cash publicly praised Dylan, defended authenticity in music, and stood up for artists who refused to compromise. That attitude made a huge impression on Ozzy, who saw in Cash a role model for surviving criticism without ever backing down. By 1969, the two had shared a stage on The Johnny Cash Show, where Ozzy marveled at Cash's effortless presence. Later, they recorded duets together in Nashville, including unreleased sessions that fans still speculate about. For Ozzy, those moments weren't just collaborations, they were lessons. He learned that music didn't need distortion or theatrics to hit hard. Sometimes all it took was a deep voice, a steady rhythm, and brutal honesty. Even years later, Ozzy continued to speak warmly of Cash. He admired the way Johnny carried his faith without preaching, and the way he balanced darkness with redemption. To Ozzy, Johnny Cash wasn't just a singer. He was proof that music could be a mirror of life itself, flawed, painful, but also beautiful. When we look back at Ozzy Osbourne's career, it's easy to get lost in the madness, the scandals, the bat incident, the endless tours that nearly broke him. But when you trace the music he loved, you see the real man beneath the chaos. The Beatles gave him hope. Led Zeppelin pushed him to be heavier. Motörhead gave him a brother. Judas Priest proved Birmingham had more than one crown jewel. A C/DC showed him the raw power of simplicity. Nirvana reminded him that honesty never goes out of style. Green Day proved rebellion can still top the charts. And Johnny Cash showed him that truth is the only thing that lasts. These weren't just bands to Ozzy. They were lifelines, teachers, and mirrors of his own soul. Together, they shaped the sound of a kid from Birmingham who would go on to change music forever. So maybe that's the real lesson in Ozzy's favorite bands. It's not about genre or style or fitting neatly into one box. It's about connection, finding the voices that keep you going when the world feels too heavy. And in the end, even the Prince of Darkness was just a fan, leaning over a record player, listening to songs that made him believe life could be something more.